to access the data for legitimate research. That's the whole point of what we're doing. So the first thing is accountability. So meaning that you need to be accountable for the use of this data. So if someone shares data with you, you're accountable for that data. So you're now in possession of it. How you use that data needs to be valid. You are accountable for it. So I think that's probably one of the biggest changes that's happened in maybe the last 10 years, maybe, in data, is the concept of accountability. Because before that, and I was just at fault, I've been working with data in medicine for close to 30 years. So many, many years ago, if someone were to kind of share some data with you and nobody knows about it, right? It was okay. Like, it really was. Like, it really was not uncommon that data sets would be shared, clinical data sets would be shared with identifiable information, and you would just be like, well, nobody knows about it, so it's okay. And so that's the accountability. So meaning that even if someone sneaks a data set to you, if you know it's not appropriate to use that data, you shouldn't. That's what accountability is. And I think that's changed a lot, as I said, in the last 5 to 10 years. So it's no longer, it shouldn't be that, if you get away with it, it's okay. It should be that you don't feel right doing it. Okay, that's the important difference. Because that's the only way you're going to get through any of it, by the way. And I don't know what the landscape is like in India. I really don't. I mean that, because I've never worked in India. So I don't know. But I can tell you in North America, anyway, that's the way it's going. The onus is on you for accountability. What is right? What is wrong? You decide what you should do. So making decisions about the use of the system and who can be affected by the outcome is why you're doing it, right? So I think that's the flip side of the coin. So if you decide on a fantastic, exciting project, based on the presentations yesterday, that's what you want to do. That's great. So what you're trying to do is change, improve patient outcome, right? You're trying to improve the health of the patient in what you do when you're working in medicine. Fantastic. But bear in mind, there may be more outcomes to what you're doing than just affecting health. And I think that's where you need to be careful that if what you're doing is unethical, then maybe doing more harm than good. That's, I think, where you need to be cautious. Okay? And what we're doing in order to resolve this ethical concern, just to, pretty much sum it up, disclosure. Everything, not everything, but mostly in legal terms, anywhere in the world, disclosure is probably one of the most important things, and documentation is another. So why is that? The reason being is, the laws that govern all countries are agreed upon by everybody who lives in it. Correct? That's how laws come to be. So the challenge is, how can you show that you're following the law? So, of course, if you think of criminal law, well, that's a bit extreme, right? So how do you show that you're not killing people? Well, it's going to be kind of obvious, right? And if you get caught by the police, well, you go to jail. So I'm not talking about that. That's kind of obvious. But how about laws, for instance, of these ones for ethics, or anything to do with privacy, which is law? Privacy is law. Ethics is not law. Privacy is law. Okay? So how do you show that you are actually following the law for privacy? Who's going to know? There's no privacy police. Who's going to knock on your door and check your computer? So how would you be able to show someone that you followed the law. You have to document. I know it sounds very boring, but when you do research, that's what you must do. You must document what you've done, how you've done it, why you're doing it. And because of that, and disclose, and because of that, even if you make a mistake, there's a breach, share information you should not have. If you documented how you were trying to follow the law, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. You'll be forgiven. You might have a tiny fine or something. No big deal. They'll just tell you don't do that again. Right? But if you have not documented what you did, and you have no way of showing that you actually tried to do your best, you will be found guilty. Okay? So that's an important concept that is not just in this world, but it's in anything you're going to do in our world. Document and disclose. Most important things ever. Okay? I'm not going to go too much into detail over this, but because it can get really onerous and there's a lot of detail. But essentially, what you want to understand is who owns, who's in control, and who uses. Okay, that's probably what you would like to keep in mind. So when I say who owns the data? Who owns healthcare data? Who owns it? Yeah, you do. It's your data. No matter what anybody says, it's yours. Don't think any differently. It's your data, and you decide who you share that data with. So who controls the data? But do you? There's the problem. There's the problem. Do you control your healthcare data? The hospital does, right? So just think of it. Let's say this is my drive, right? My pen drive. So if I had all my healthcare data, all of it, all my lab tests, all of my, X-rays, MRIs, medical reports, all of it was on here. All of it. Nowhere else. It's on here. Then I own this and I control this. Because then when I go see my physician, I'm going to say, here's my history. And he's going to read it. And then say, oh, okay, well, let's do this, and we're going to change your medication, and thank you for coming. And then he gives this back to me. And I go, there we go. That would be ideal. But it does not exist that way anywhere in the world. Okay, you're having exactly. You can have a copy of it, but it exists in the healthcare systems of the world. So that's why you have who controls the data. So who controls the data are custodians. They're called custodians of data. They're responsible for controlling your data, and that is the healthcare professional. Okay? Healthcare professionals control your data, and they are responsible for your data. That's a big responsibility for them. Okay, if they inappropriately share your data, they get fired. So it's a big deal. Okay, so it's a big responsibility for healthcare providers. But just understand, you don't really control your data. I'd love to be able to lie to you and say, yeah, of course you do. No, you don't. Okay? So you need to be aware of that. And so those are the rights that you have that we as researchers have to abide to. And that's where we're accountable and responsible. So remember I said, whose data does it belong to? Who controls the data and who uses the data? So researchers are going to use the data. Physicians use the data, of course, as well to do their job, right? So they're users as well. As researchers, and that's what we're here for, is, we use the data as well. So we need to be mindful of that process. So you need to be mindful of that process. Remember who owns the data, who controls the data, and who uses it. So when you use that data, you need to make sure that you're using it in an ethical way and without breaching policy or laws, which is privacy. Does that make sense? That's really all you need to remember. An ethical use of data, if you don't understand ethics, not an easy thing. Don't feel bad. Ask someone. Okay? But ethics is very complex. And it basically comes down to morality. That's what. So ethical, there's no, I mean, there are some, standards based on Nuremberg. And so definitely that's where we started. But there are standards, right, that what's ethical and what's not. So what's fair and what's not. What's, inequality or abuse of authority, right? So those kind of things is where ethics come into play. But you have to understand where I live and where you live are different societies, different cultures, different laws, different government, different everything. So that means morally, what's morally right here in India may be different in Canada. So remember that ethics is governed by morality. What is morally right, what is acceptable in your society is what drives ethics. So you have to ask, don't ask me, what your ethics are. Ask yourself what your ethics are, right? So make sure you talk to your ethics boards, what's called ethics boards, which you're going to have to talk to in all of your institutions or universities or anywhere you're going to do research. You're going to have to make sure that your research is approved by these ethics boards whenever you're involving. Okay, so ethical research with humans. Is there ethical research with animals? Yes, actually. There's ethics for animals, the fair treatment of animals. And that's it's once you think of it, it's pretty straightforward, right? It kind of makes sense that you want to do research that's going to be fair, right? And it's not going to basically be abusive, right? It's not going to take advantage of people in order to perform your research. That came from, it all stems from the Germans, right, in the Second World War, who experimented on humans. And it was, on the flip side, it kind of really gave a big boost to medicine. Oh, it sounds really ridiculous, right? It was extremely unethical. However, the knowledge that was acquired in that short period, that's very sad. And that's the reason that we had the Nuremberg trials ethics was that there is this draw. Say, if we experiment, we're going to learn so much. But at what cost? So it's not appropriate to experiment on humans because fair. Right? It's not fair. Like, why would it be right for us to do a clinical trial where we would deprive one arm of treatment and the other one with treatment? Not fair. So that's a good example. You're going to do some testing of treatment, and you're going to withdraw the standard of care to a group of patients, and you're going to give it to another. So all the patients that you're not treating aren't getting treated. It's not fair, is it? Right? So that's an example of ethics. You would not do that. All the patients that are not getting treated, and you're going to wait, let's say 5 years or something, and then, oh, look at that, the ones that weren't treated are all dead. Oh, well, I guess our treatment's good. Well, come on, there's got to be a better way to test our treatment than to have a whole arm in a study die for you to realize that the treatment's good, okay? That's a very drastic example of ethical research, okay? All right, so enough of ethics. So value alignment is a big deal, and we already touched on it earlier this week, and that was machines, engage in human communities like ours, right? And they are what's called autonomous agents. We've talked about that, AI agents, right? Then those agents will be expected to follow the community's social and moral norms. Sounds familiar, right? A necessary step in enabling machines to do so is to identify these norms. But whose norms? So once again, it's the same thing. It's your norms, where you do your work, right? And you need to realize that AI doesn't understand your norms. And so you need to impart that on your research, on your agents, okay? So make sure you understand why it has to align, which makes sense, totally. But it's the second clause here that's important, right? Humans use contextual factors, experiences, memories, upbringing, cultural norms. That's a big one here in India. Your culture is very diverse, right? In order to make a decision and judging between right and wrong. That's the key. Just because you believe in different things. We all believe in different things all over the globe, right? So that doesn't change anything. But what does it impact the most for you as an engineer is this. Making it. Because, you would think it's easy to make a decision between right and wrong. But wow, it really isn't. Because of everything I just said here. There's so much contextual factors that influence your ability to make a decision. So you need to make sure that any AI that you are building takes that into it. Because if I were to build software in Canada based on my culture, my society, my norms, my moral rights, and then I sell it to you here in India, do you think it will fit? Not necessarily. I mean, maybe, depending on what it is. But probably not. There's going to be a few things that are not going to fit because that's not how you see the world in India. Does it make it right or wrong? No. It's different. It's just not a fit. So I'm not here to preach to you. I'm not here to say that, be a good person. And, not at all. I'm here being very practical. If you want to build an algorithm that's going to be adopted and used and beneficial, you need to do this. So from a business perspective, I do this very specifically to make sure I'm successful in the market I'm selling. So if I create an algorithm and I want to sell it for profit, my job is to understand your culture so that my application will be successfully sold in India. Does that make sense? By the way, I have never sold in India. But who knows, maybe that'll change. But that's the challenge you guys are facing, okay? And then this is just, we've already talked about this. So basically, AI just doesn't understand it. It just does not have those experiences drawn, and you need to share that with AI. So you, the designer and developer, right, need to do this. Okay? I think we've kind of touched on all this. Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of how I'm going to go through this in the next presentation. So just to give you an idea of how we get through this. But why do we do this? Most importantly, of course, who's the user? Trust and approval from the patients. That's key. Okay? If you don't have trust and approval from the patients, who expect what? What do patients expect? Disclosure. They expect disclosure. They expect transparency. They do not want to have anything hidden from them. Okay? And so then this is what you need to do when you're putting together, your solution. Okay. So we've talked a lot about explainability, and I'm just going to touch on it really quickly. Yeah. So basically, we've talked about explainability, right? So explainability. There's a difference between explainability and interpretability, right? So explainability is you, the engineers. So explainability means that you need to be able to explain how your model works, right? We've talked about that. Make sense? And it's at the model level. Interpretability is the grad cam heat map that we've seen so many of them. You guys did them. You guys made some heat maps. That's interpretability. That means that the physician can actually look at that map and say, oh, I concur. I would have thought the same thing when I look at that image, where that red area is. Yeah, that's what I would have looked at. That's interpretability. Not explainability, it's interpretability. Both are very important. So why do we need it? It is for this. It is for transparency. How is a patient who is not a researcher, not a developer, how are you as a patient going to be able to understand that what was done, what is being done is ethical, is appropriate, is fair. How are you going to know? You're only going to know if it's explained to you. And that's the purpose of explaining. It's actually going to be law in Canada. And I don't know in India. I did a little research in India, but I don't know if that law is going to come to pass in India. But it is a requirement for all AI to be explainable in Canada soon. The law hasn't passed, it's still stuck in government, but it will. It's just any tools, any ADA put on ADA. That's the law. Any software that's going to be put on the market needs to be explainable. You need to have a second opinion and et cetera, et cetera. But the most important thing is it needs to be explainable. Okay, so the reason we do this, and we've already touched on this, is fairness, right? So just remember that. You want to minimize bias. We've talked a lot about bias, right? So just remember that's the reason we do it. Now I'm going to zip through these just to remind you, or not even remind you, I don't think we haven't covered it. But I've talked to you about biases that exist in the data, like classification, that kind of stuff. Let me just quickly go through a few biases that maybe you wouldn't have thought of. Unconscious biases. So overestimating certain events that are greater, due to greater availability is the biggest problem in our world of engineering, right? They're called shortcuts, right? So the algorithm is inherently lazy. All algorithms are inherently lazy. They look for the easiest way to satisfy your requirement. That will never change. Okay? So if you give it the ability to find a solution through a shortcut, it's called a shortcut, it will do it. So you need to be very aware of that. And it can be something silly, like on X-rays, for instance. If you have an X-ray, and all the ones that you're interested in have a certain marking on the X-ray. And all the ones that are negative or whatever you're not interested in don't have that marking. And it's because when they were labeling the X-rays or something like that, they put a little mark on the X-ray to say that, oh, that one's interesting, look at that one. So that's a classic example of a shortcut, right? And your algorithm is going to find that little mark. And then it's not going to look at all of the X-rays, it's just going to look at that little mark. So the next time you feed it an X-ray that just doesn't, from another institution that didn't mark them, it's not going to work. Okay? So some of the unconscious biases that you can think of is like an empathy gap, stereotyping. Those are good ones to go over, right? So empathy gap is tendency to underestimate the influence or strength of feeling. And stereotyping, I'm sure you guys know, right, is a member group to have certain characteristics without having actual information to that individual. So these are kind of data collection biases that can happen. And you just need to think of them, as developers, and say, I wonder if, the data that I've collected, that I've received from the institution, might have that, okay? And that can definitely, that is, wow, culturally embedded. Because depending on the institution you're in, the hospital, wherever, the way they collect data, the way they serve their patients, the way they collect information on their patients may be influenced by culture or whatever. Okay? And so you just need to be aware of that. Right? And there's a whole bunch of them. And these are all fun terms, right? Anchoring bias, relying too much on one trait or piece of information which makes decisions. That's so common, right? Because you think of it, when you go see your physician and say, hey, what data can you share with me? Right? Well, they always say, well, I got a lot of this. And they always have a lot of that. Well, that's an anchoring bias, okay? Bandwagon, believe things because many other people do, wow, all the time. That's like adoption of technology, right? Adoption of AI can be split up into basically three groups. The rule of thirds in medicine. In medicine, there's all these rules that, these people go ahead. So the rule of thirds in this case is you have 1/3 of early adopters. That's us. We love it. Think of it. You're all here because you're interested in AI. I'm here because I like talking about AI. Right? Perfect. So we're all happy together. That's the 1/3. Then you have another third of people that are these guys. The bandwagon bias. So the bandwagon is, well, I got this really good friend, and they think AI is really cool. I think AI is cool. Right? That's another third. And then you have the one third that says, I'm not interested in AI over my dead body. Not doing it. Lots of physicians like that. Not doing it. Don't believe in it. I know better. So, and that's reality. That's the three groups. So how do you think you fix the problem of the one third not doing it? How do you fix that? Okay, so working on convincing them, correct? Working on encouraging them to see the light. Yeah, showing them examples and all that. So what do you guys think? Do you think you're going to be successful? Do you have anybody like that? How about your parents? Do some of your parents, I'm not talking about AI, but for your parents, you really want to convince them that using your phone is really not a bad thing. Right? How successful are you at changing your parents' mind? So you show them. You say, look, mom and dad, man, look what I can do on my phone. I got this, I got that. I have my schedule on here. I know. How successful are you guys? Has anyone here actually convinced their parents, and their parents now say, oh yeah, wow, that's fantastic. Thank you for showing me that. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Please use your phone. Who's had that happen to them? Yeah, zero, right? Zero. Okay, so when you're talking to physicians who don't believe in AI, it's exactly the same thing. They are not going to agree with you no matter what you say. I'm telling you that, okay? So who can you convince? The second third. The bandwagon people, those are the people you should be targeting. Because then 2/3 of everybody is with you, right? You got us, and then you got the second third. So what do you do with the third that's not going to do it? How do we solve that problem? Fine. They retire and die. I'm being very pragmatic. Okay? They do. You just give it time, and they will all retire and go away, and they will die, and will no longer be giving their opinion that AI sucks. And this isn't just for AI. This is for anything. Anything that society deals with, any technology society deals with, that's the way it works. So then all we need to do is be patient. Is there anything wrong with being patient? Not at all. You don't want to rush anything. Because we could be wrong. We could be completely wrong about it. You realize that, right? Maybe Skynet is going to happen. Wouldn't that suck? Because I've always said it's never going to happen. I could be wrong. Skynet, end of the world. Bummer. It's a reality. It could happen. So, not really. But seriously, it's good to take your time, all right, in delivering new technology. Okay. A whole bunch of other biases. I just wanted to, I'm not even going to go through these because it'd be ridiculous. You'd all fall asleep. But I just want to say there are so many of them. Okay. Pay attention to all the biases that can influence your data. And yeah, I think so. Now I'm going to go. I'm going to ask questions, and then I have one last presentation, which is going to be a little bit more. Well, I'm not even going to go resolving bias because you guys know what it is, right? You just have to identify them. As soon as you identify them, it's easy to. Okay. Yeah. So you bring up my second. So do you have anybody have questions on ethics, biases? Yeah. So the features, what do you mean features? So how are they? Yeah. Any weights? What are they weights? Weights. The numeric weights. Not the raw data. So you're going to keep the weights, and you're going to share the weights so other people can retrain. So that's a great question. And so, as in, you always answer. As a statistician, you're trained to always answer with "it depends." True, it does depend. The question is very good in that it actually has caused a lot of grief in the industry. And that is collect a bunch of data, train on it, do it, result in embeddings, weights, right? That's actually how the model works. You don't have the raw data in your phone when it's running the algorithm. You only have the weights. So the question then is, can we share the weights? Because obviously it's not identifiable at all. It's like summary data, right? It's all summarized. Correct? Yes. No. So the yes is it's not unethical at all. It's breach of privacy at all. So in that sense, yeah, absolutely. Make it public. It's actually a good thing, make it public. Great, it's going to promote research. So here's where the problem is. How was the data collected? It was unethical. Story over, right? Okay. When you collected the data, what was the agreement? What was the legal agreement with the party that you were dealing with? Discard the data. But was there anything in the agreement about sharing the weight? Yeah, so whoops. Problem. So technically you should go back and ask. If you have a lawyer, you're rich enough to have a lawyer, then you say, who cares? Sue me. Fine. But if you're not, probably better to ask, hey, by the way, is it okay if we share the weight? You should probably ask. Okay, so it comes down to legality. So it's not you're not going to get charged by privacy law, but you could be sued by whoever gave you the data. Okay, so that's what you do. Okay? And that's common sense. So where did this pop up? Because what they did, they scraped the internet just for all information, and they were caught. Hey, wait a minute! You shouldn't have done that. And they're like, oh, sorry. Well, it's all in our weights, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you do need to be careful. So then it becomes a legal thing. So it's no longer a privacy issue. It's, whatever. And they even said, hey, it's on the internet. It was publicly available. So why can't we? Well, that comes down to what I started this whole talk about, which is right? That's the question that happens. Just because you can do it doesn't make it right for you to do it. If you find data on the internet that shouldn't be there, yay, I can use it. Just remember, if you're okay with that, good for you. But you have to be careful. Okay, so is that good? Does that answer the question? Anybody else any questions? Like, yep. Yep. Perfect. Yep. Yep. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I know your question. Excellent. And so, by the way, I'm happy to answer questions. Talk about this is not my. The only reason I talk about it, I've done it so long, but I'm not like that's not my disclaimer. Okay. So to answer your question, no. So what you need to do is RAD. So then what you're asking data, lab, use it for research, essentially, without consent. that's the appropriate. Absolutely. Okay? And it's not fair. So, I mean, there are different laws around the world, and there are actually different laws within our own country in Canada. That some provinces, so we don't have states, we have provinces, some provinces say once data is de-identified, anonymized, it no longer falls under privacy law. Sense, right? How could it? So if that's the case, as soon as you have data that's, de-identified, anonymized, you do whatever you want with it. It doesn't fall under privacy law. You're not breaking any privacy law, right? Other provinces will say, yeah, sure, but how did that data get anonymized? So if you had the right to anonymize that data by consent of the patient, good. But if someone anonymized it without consent, no good. So it all depends on your state in India, how it would be read. But best practice, ask ethics. Because they will just, I mean, you got to hope they're nice. Not always, but, hopefully they're nice. So when you ask them, they're just going to say, oh, for sure, thank you for asking. Absolutely, you can use the data because we see no harm. We understand your research. You already have ethics. You're asking for an amendment, right? You're asking for a change in ethics. And it's just to take up a little bit more data. And they just say, no problem. How could we ask for consent when we don't even know who it is, right? And they're going to give it to you. But then you're okay. By just doing it, you could get in trouble. Sound good? Okay. So what I did here, I have two coffee guys. Anyway, so I'm just doing a comparative framework for Canada versus India on how we step through this. Okay? And yeah, maybe I'll let's go to the decision tree. So do you need trial registration or device approval? So this is exactly what we talked about, I think we started talking about yesterday. And essentially, you as developers are going to want to put together a solution, correct? So we talked about a whole bunch of them. We have 2 more presentations today. And that is, what do we have to be aware of in the world of medicine, right, in healthcare? So the first thing, we've already talked about it, is will the app or project, whatever, result in what's called software as a medical device? So it's not a medical device, per se. It is. But it's software that's acting as a medical device. It's actually making clinical decisions. Okay? If it is, then regulatory pathways apply. We've talked about that. So in Canada, okay, the first thing we would need to do, if we're doing a project, is we would have to register with the Investigational Testing Authorization, so the ITA. We have to get that, register with them and get that authorization. In India, it's called the CLA approval, and there's a form. No clue what that is. But that's what you guys have to do in India, and that's the equivalent to the ITA in Canada. So that means if it is going to be a clinical study, you need to get approval from the CLA. I have a glossary at the CLA stand. If it's not going to be SMB, so it's not a clinical decision-making tool, skip it. No regulatory or compliance. Yay. You don't have to do that. Okay, so that's for regulatory compliance. So remember, regulatory compliance. I know, especially for the young crowd here, right? You like just talking about stuff, like you're talking about something that's completely unrelated to anything you ever dreamt you'd hear about. But the thing is one day, someone here is going to say, "Oh, I really want to develop software that can be used." And you go, "What did that bald guy talk about? Like, you guys remember that talk?" Anyway, that's when you're going to use it. Okay. So step 2 is it interventional? Okay. So the difference between regulatory and interventional, regulatory just means it's used in a clinical setting for but not necessarily clinical. In any kind of setting that makes a clinical decision, right? So any kind of medical decision, healthcare decision. That's regulatory, meaning you can actually use your device in clinic. That's what that means. It's just regulatory. Now, when you're doing research, you need to know, is the study interventional? Interventional means clinical experimentation. You don't like to use the word experimentation, really, because we're not experimenting on humans. That sounds terrible. But we're doing an interventional study. Okay? It's a form of experimentation. So if you are, meaning you're doing a drug trial, try this drug, see if it's better than what we are currently offering. So see the way I worded that? Right? So what we're currently offering is the standard practice, right? What you do, what everybody gets. So it's fair. Everybody gets this treatment today. And this other arm, this other group of patients are going to get this new drug. Ooh, we're going to see if it works. Okay? So that's an interventional study. That requires oversight. So if yes, then you must register the trial. So in Canada, we do what's called clinicaltrials.gov, which is in the United States. There's another group, ISRCTN. And you just register. You just literally list it saying, I'm going to do this research. And that means that anybody in the world can look this up and say, oh, they're doing that research over there, right? So it's just a way of disclosure. Remember I said disclosure? So that's what it means. In India, actually, interestingly, it's mandatory to register with CPRI. Whatever that is. Yeah. So, yeah, you know all about it. So, you must register your trial there, okay? If no, it's observational. What in medicine is called observational. So there's no experiment, right? There's no intervention. We're just observing something. You don't have to register the trial. No requirement. Okay? But you do need ethics board approval and privacy compliance. Talked about, to no end, right? Inevitably, of course, with the trial registration, you also need ethics and privacy. Okay. Anyway, before I go to that, any questions on that? So you see the suddenly, most of you are like, oh my God, I don't want to work in healthcare. Let me go back to finance, I'm telling you, working in medicine is brutal. It is. I've been working in it my entire life, pretty much. And it's very challenging. But the only thing is, and all students that end up in my lab, all of them say this, very rewarding. The majority of the students that enter my lab don't come from healthcare. They come from finance, they come from engineering, lots of people. And they all come to me because they say, I want to apply my skills in an area that I know is having an impact. So, building new cars is impactful. Let's be fair, it is impactful. But there are certain people that just feel that helping other humans like them is what they enjoy and is what is impactful. Okay, so any questions on that? No? It's not easy, but the thing is you can look it up. But just remember, regulatory, interventional. So regulatory is for the sale of product on the market that is involved, that needs regulation. Okay? That's regulatory. Intervention is research. So interventional study is at the research. Okay? So if it is a SAMD, do you need to do this immediately? No. Probably the first thing is going to be this one, the intervention. Okay, do your research first. Because if it fails, then you're not going to go to regulatory because you don't have a product. Okay? So that's probably the way it works, right? So if you look at your timeline, I made this up completely, right? So the timeline is, define your use case and classify what kind of app you're doing. That's good. 1 to 2 weeks. But let's say 1 to 2 weeks. The next step, REB ethics approval. All right? Get that ethics approval. The problem is, it takes 8 to 12 weeks is really optimistic. That's really optimistic. Okay? 3 months is optimistic. Very often it takes 6 months to get. Okay? I don't know about in India. I'm guessing it's probably similar. It takes a long time. Then, once you get ethics, then you can, if you have a SND, you can think of your ITA, right? So registering. CTA, it's a CTA for drugs and biologics. CIHR in Canada is the Canadian Institute for Health Research. So they want you to register your trial, remember, with clinicaltrials.gov. In Canada, right, PIPEDA and PHIPAA, that's our privacy law. Okay? And so we would need to make sure we're compliant. Then you get into recruitment, adverse event monitoring if you're doing an interventional trial, which means that you have to, legal, that you actually have to monitor if any patients are being hurt. Of course. Yes. And so then you're going to do that. And then results reporting. Okay, so how about India? So same thing. Define your use case and classify. In this case, your ethics, IEC, there's a whole bunch of words. REB, IEC, it's all ethics, right? Ethics committee. Ethics committee. And then you're going to do your CLA, as we said, your CTRI, whatever that is. For you in India for privacy, it's your DPDB, okay? And I don't know what the ABDM is in integration, but anyway, so it's some kind of privacy law, and you can do that in parallel, and then you go into your recruitment. Of course, you're going to be doing adverse event reporting. Everything else is going to be the same, right? Yes, and clinical trial documentation and reporting. Okay, so what are the contrasts? You know, it was funny. I thought there'd be major contrasts. It's not really. It's quite similar. The only thing, this one here, mandatory injury compensation, that's interesting. I was like, so, you know, inevitably, what if you do hurt somebody? What if you do hurt somebody? Oops, problem. Right? So in India, it's actually compulsory that you have to compensate people. Okay? So that's that was a big one difference. In Canada, I'm not saying that we don't compensate people, we do, but it's a little different, right? So it's not compulsory to compensate. It's going to be in the courts, basically. You'll get sued. Okay, so CIHR reporting deadlines are enforced. Compensation is by an institution, so it's at the institutional level, not at the government level. And it's pretty minor. Timelines faster for non-SAMD. I would say, if I had to hazard a guess, I would say most of it should be a little quicker in India because your level of oversight is a little less than in Canada. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's just you're growing, you know, you're getting there. And the more it gets complex and the more there's, you know, issues, the slower it takes, right? So I would say in India, you're probably going to be a little quicker, a little slower in Canada, right? Well, here's the glossary of terms. CTRI, Clinical Trials Registry of India. What was the other one? CTA, Clinical Trial Application Process. ITA. Oh, no, that's Canada. What was the other one from here? Oh, ABDM. I can't even read that. You see that from here? That's amazing. Wow, I can barely read it here, and you read it up. But you know it. I'm just kidding. You know it. So excellent. MDR. So they put down MDR. I'll tell you what that is in a sec. IEC, Institutional Ethics Committee. Yeah. So I guess maybe you call it that, institutional. Is that what you call it here in India? Institutional Ethics Committee, IEC. Okay. So we call it REB, or you know, in Canada it's REB, Research Ethics Board. Right. IRB, Institutional Research Board, you know, yeah, whatever. Anyway, so there's different ways of saying. So the one I wanted to pick up was MDR 2017. So MDR is a standard for medical devices in Europe. So obviously there's going to be some overlap because you can adopt whatever you want, right? You can do FDA. Okay, that's it. I just wanted to go back to comparative framework. Did we touch on it? Yeah, we did. Ethics, compensation. Yep. Covered it all. Oh, no, this one here, ethics. Woo, there we go. Last one. So in Canada, in order to be the boss, the PI, the principal investigator, you have to have ethics training. Okay? So you learn about ethics, how it was developed, where it is, what's right, what's wrong, all that kind of stuff, what you should know why you do it, all that stuff. And for us, it's called TCPS, right, and REB. And so that's training that's required. In India, it's called ICMR guidelines and IEC. So there are ethics in India as well, and you need to be aware of that if you're going to be a researcher. So you guys as engineers right now, you know, you're going to be participating at a level probably you're not going to require it. But if you become a professor in the area, then inevitably you're going to be a guy, you're going to have that. Okay, any questions on that? But joking aside, you'll remember, some of you, one day, are going to remember, what the heck was he talking about? I need to know now, right? Because you do. You really do. If you want to be successful at taking a project to the community, you have to know all that. Okay? So I think my job being here is not to show you content, because you can all ChatGPT now, right? Content's easy now. Right? So if you need to know something, you look it up. You don't need me to tell you that. You don't need me to tell you how to code. Do I? Right? What you do need is somebody to encourage you to do it and to tell you you can do it. But anybody can just stand up here and say, you can do it. But, mom and dad just says that every day before you leave for the day. You can do it. We love you. We love you, child. You're amazing, right? Your parents say that all the time. But does that actually get you to do something? No. What gets you to do it is to see someone else who's done it, right? And who can share with you the experiences of how ridiculously challenging it is, or, oh, don't forget to look for this, or don't forget to do that. That's the piece that you don't find on ChatGPT. You're actually starting to kind of find it a little bit, but not really. So I think that's what you're supposed to walk away from this course with, is not just a lot of facts, but more, I can do that. I think I can do that. It's something I'd like to try. And probably the biggest step for you guys, because it's the same in Canada, is moving from doing something like the projects you've done. They're great. But do you see how easy that was? Let's be brutally honest, right? How hard were your projects? Like, really? Was that the hardest thing you've ever done in your life? Really? Right? No, it wasn't. Like, seriously, anybody can build a classifier in like an afternoon. Like, seriously. You just pulled a data set off the internet and then ran it, and you produce your accuracy. And you're like, ooh, that's exciting. Come on, man. It's not, right? You know that. So what is exciting is to do that and actually have a physician use it in their clinic. That's exciting. But do you see how difficult it is to get it to the clinic? Right? So ironically, the algorithms you did in this course potentially could actually be used in clinic. Right? If you got really good accuracy, why wouldn't it be able to be used in clinic? Well, the reason it can't be is because of everything I just talked about today. If you don't have access to people in clinic, you did not prepare, so meaning the way you collected your data was not appropriate, then when regulators and REB comes to you and says, wow, I love your algorithm. That's fantastic. I think that's a great idea. So tell me, where did you get your data? How did you collect your data? How did you validate your data? How did you validate the way you designed your algorithm to make sure you don't hurt patients? Did you do all that? So did you guys do any of that? None of that. You didn't even think of that, did you? That's where it's hard. Okay? Training algorithms is easy. But thinking of how you're going to do this work so that someone can use it for real in clinic is not easy. That's the hard part. Okay? And if you contribute to that, you're going to move down the path, right, to getting something to the clinic, which ultimately is really cool. And if that's not what you're interested in, if you just heard me say, after today's lecture, you say, oh my God, that's the last thing I want to do, that's okay too. But you have to realize your role. So if your role as an engineer is to help me do this, then that's fine. That's your role. You're not interested in doing this. Not interested. That's not for me. I don't care. What I do care about is coding. I'm really jazzed about coding. Then just realize what you want to do, right? You want to help me improve my model so that I can use it in clinic. Good for you. That's great. But at least you know what you want to do, right? And I think today, or this week, hopefully this helps you make that decision. Decide where you are in the path, in the pipeline, whether you want to do the whole thing or just a part of it. Who knows? Maybe someone here has decided, I want to go into medicine. That happens all the time in my lab. I have engineers that come into my lab and they're like, oh yeah, I love coding. And then once they participate at this level, they go, I want to go to med school. And they go to med school and they become a physician. Happens all the time. All the time. So who knows? Maybe someone here will decide to go into medicine. Right? But that's ultimately what you should be thinking, is where do I fit in the process? How can I contribute to the process? And where am I happiest in the process? Right? Okay. Questions? Tea time? We good? Awesome. Let's do tea.